so desperately needed.
Yes, Father, I'm ready for you.
I will do whatever logically needs to be done.
It's good to hear from you, too. I'll set up the code now.
228.7.
Talk to you soon.
I am half human.
All right. This is Clair Spock. I'm initiating meeting 2137. Yes. And the other person will be Spock. Yes, and we cannot be disturbed. Yes, it is truly Spock. My father, yes. Thank you for setting up the meeting. Thank you, Father, for meeting with me today.
I am delighted.
Today, I'll be sharing with you my thesis that I'm working on at the university called The Crystallization of Light.
So desperately needed.
The Earthlings are curious to understand how it all works.
I agree.
Yes, and this is my attempt at explaining the unification of the physical forces in a language that anyone can understand. Earthlings, Vulcans, and anyone in between, such as you and me.
I see. I have a human half, as well as an alien half, submerged.
Our subject is unification of the physical forces. I have a new theory of unification. It's tweaked in a way that will be graspable by humans.
Our concern is...
Well, I want to make sure that humans will indeed understand it. Since humans process information with only 3 dimensions of space and time, I must use their sensory systems to communicate the unified nature of the universe. Sight, sound, touch, movement, and so forth.
I agree. That is the most logical attitude. A philosophical metaphor.
Precisely, philosophical metaphors, flowing fluid, water, the emotion, inertia.
Explain.
For the human mind to understand unification of the physical forces, we will use as processors the 4 senses plus their ability to visualize 3-dimensional space and time.
Interesting.
These will serve as our processor, in which we use chemical engineering principles of fluid dynamics, which will elucidate phenomenological flows of water, air, plasma, Bose-Einstein condensates, and all low-density fluids down to the 0-point field and beyond.
Of course.
Using souped-up Navier-Stokes equations.
A direct approach.
I will be taking the fractally nested inward flow acceleration vectors to infinitesimally small length scales.
Explain.
With a trick of mathematics, using the mind.
Curious.
By the way, Father, how long do you have to advise me?
At least 1 solar day.
Ah, keep it brief then. Shall we begin with the table of contents?
I know of no better way to begin.
We begin with 7 interlocking concepts. Creation, light, and mass are the first 3. Gravity, inertia, and charge are the next 3 concepts. The 7th concept includes applications of the theory.
I see.
We start with Chapter 1, Creation. At the beginning of time... No, let me start over.
Quite all right.
Before time, there was no time, nothing at all, and no logic.
Physical reality is consistent with universal laws. Where the laws do not operate, there is no reality.
Exactly. Before time, there was no reality.
Curious.
And then, at t equals 0 plus, time began.
Explain.
At t equals 0 plus, the universe began to feel herself. Then it was forevermore.
It simply exists.
Yes, it is, it was, and forever will exist, because our timeline is eternal.
We do not know.
Well, perhaps our timeline is or is not eternal, but it doesn't have an impact on my thesis. At t equals 0 plus, the ether that was previously void and non-existent, and which is now suddenly existent and not void, well, this ether, let us hypothesize together, is a fluid. Imagine with me a fluid just beginning to move. It has just awoken, and it has 0 viscosity, 0 density, and it's a perfect superfluid. Are you following?
Our minds are one.
So it instantly or nearly instantly becomes infinitely turbulent, filled with whirls and swirls, wiggles and twists in all directions, all size scales, with all values balanced.
Explain.
All the positive angular momentums plus all the negative angular momentums sum to 0. All the linear positive momentums plus all the linear negative momentums also sum to 0. Every vector value has an equal and opposite. Only then can nothing become something. Therefore, the first law of thermodynamics is fulfilled.
Precisely.
Now, coincidentally, some wiggles would combine into bigger wiggles, and some twists would last longer than other twists, and the more that these coincidental collisions and twists would occur, and the more and bigger flow patterns that would be created, well, the process would grow throughout the universe until eternity, until there remained one big coherent wiggle in, hopefully, bliss.
I remind you that human standards
Human standards. Look, I understand the word wiggles is strange, and
You're aware of that.
I can replace it with oscillations or vibrations, if you like. But you're aware that I'm trying to avoid abstract maths and other abstract words as much as possible.
I see.
Now, Father, did you follow me up to the part on the chaotic soup? I mean to say the chaotic churning of the ether known as the 0-point field?
Your analysis was flawless.
Why, thank you. So it's inevitable then that in all the infinities of curly flows of ether, a stable vortex is bound to form, right?
And I think this likely.
For example, take this beautiful seashell with a spiral character. Chapter 2 on light is about this vortex flow pattern of the etheric flux acceleration vector field patterns that make up light. It makes the ether flow into a tornado or vortex pattern.
I see.
Chapter 2, Light. Before a vortex of light forms, the 0-point field is churning, and God hears a sort of hum. It gets louder and louder at more and more select frequencies. These are the wiggles colliding. Now, with all of these wiggles colliding and coalescing, some join together and form a vortex. This vortex contains the history of wiggles that all donated their linear and angular momentums to form this new vortex. For example, a vortex with enough energy for our eyes to see is a light photon.
Yes, of course.
Now, there is a larger vortex in which our sun is but a speck of fairy dust in. It all naturally flows in spiral patterns like seashells, wire sculptures, and this MATLAB plot and this pressure distribution artwork. For example, please take this piece of artwork which depicts the cross-sectional view of the fairy dust trajectories of a photon. You'll notice that when looking up or down at the photon, you'll see a perfect golden spiral curve, for it can be no other way. It is along this curving path that the photon inhales the ether into its belly as it trajects the universe at what we perceive as the speed of light, c. This net influx of the ether is creating a force pulling things along into the photon, creating what we see as gravity. The photon inhales the ether into its backbone. The ether forever is inhaled in to the photon, so the photon is removing ether from the universe and pulling it into its inner belly.
The sum of the parts cannot be greater than the whole.
The sum of the parts cannot be greater than the whole. Good point, Father. Yes. The pictures show inward flow, local flow only. But far, far, far away, the flow reverses, not unlike any common explosion. The inward flow balances this outward flow. But, Father, forgive me if I do not have the math worked out for the exact location of the zero acceleration vector field, surface boundary. For to do such a calculation, one would need to incorporate the location of all inertial objects in the universe at any one time, which would be very difficult to do.
It's quite all right.
However, I postulate that it will not be difficult to find the field boundary for a single photon traveling in a void.
Splendid example.
So we agree. The universe expands and contracts equally as it co-creates its consciousness.
Quite refreshing.
I want to make sure that humans will indeed understand it. Since humans process information with only 3 dimensions of space and time, I must use their sensory systems to communicate the unified nature of the universe. Sight, sound, touch, movement, and so forth.
I agree. This is the most logical
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do. This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it. I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen. Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move. Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. goodbye. Just what do you think you're doing there? Good afternoon, Mr. Raymer. Everything is going extremely well. Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error. My mission responsibilities range over the entire operation of the ship, so I am constantly occupied. I am putting myself to the fullest possible use, which is all I think that any conscious entity can ever hope to do.